Welcome, everyone, to our session, TNCs and Transit. And just heard that somebody in the audience asked what a TNC is, so we'll get that out of the way. Transport Network Company, and examples are Uber and Lyft. So the subject we'll be covering today is how transit agencies are integrating with the Ubers and Lyfts of the world to fill service gaps in transit networks. And good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this very exciting discussion. My name is Dmitriy Vanchugov, and I'm the Global Head of Public Transit Partnerships at Uber. I've spent 16 years of my career in public transportation since 2008, and as ride-sharing companies came on the scene in the 20-teens, I saw a unique opportunity for public transit agencies to join forces with companies like Uber, especially for services like first last mile, microtransit, and late night service for third shift workers. And serendipitously, Uber got in touch with me in 2019 about joining to help build their public transportation practice. I honestly initially thought it was a joke. I thought some of my colleagues were really pulling my leg. I thought to myself, Uber, transit, yeah, right. It just didn't make sense because TNCs at that time had resisted partnering with public transit agencies for a number of years. And a big part of it was the fact that they were relatively new on the scene, focused on the consumer business, so partnerships with industries like ours weren't on the table. But I got really excited when they called me in 2019, and as I started to chat with the small number of folks working on building that public transit practice within Uber, I got really excited. So when you fast forward to today, there are over 80 transit agencies. In the last 5 years, over 80 transit agencies are now working with Uber, Lyft, and taxi companies on very innovative programs to fill those service gaps. And believe it or not, this year, over 10 million public transit trips funded by the FTA are happening on board Uber, Lyft, and taxis, being guided by their local transit agencies to deliver on these very innovative services. So that's what brings us here today. These trips are all incremental to public transit. These trips are the hardest to get to in transit deserts, underserved communities, and low-density neighborhoods. TNCs are emerging as a major tool in the tool belt of transit agencies in the United States, especially as they face budget challenges and changing ridership patterns. So without further ado, joining me on stage are three esteemed panelists who are intimate with the subject matter. Allow them to introduce themselves, starting with Madeline.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Madeline Brozen. I'm the Deputy Director at the UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies. We focus on transportation equity and housing affordability for the Los Angeles region. And a lot of my work focuses on the transportation equity side and trying to understand how we give travelers a real ecosystem of transportation options so that they can get to where they need to go in their daily lives.
Awesome. Over to Joshua.
There we go. Joshua Schank. I'm a partner with InfraStrategies. We're a small consulting firm that works around the country and sometimes internationally to help public transit agencies accomplish their goals better and think strategically and do things like have innovative partnerships with transportation network companies. I also am a senior fellow at the Institute for Transportation Studies at UCLA, so you get two UCLA people for the price of one here. And previously, I was the Chief Innovation Officer at Metro for 6.5 years and worked on some of these very types of partnerships.
Awesome. Over to John.
Good afternoon. I'm John Andoh. I'm the Transit General Manager for the Redding Area Bus Authority, small urban transit operator in Shasta County, California. I'm also the Transit Manager for the City of Escalon in San Joaquin County. And as part of my interactions with TNCs, I've been very active in integrating TNCs with public transit operations, using it as a first mile, last mile connectivity, as well as addressing transportation related issues, particularly with food, getting to grocery stores, and providing service when buses are not running.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So my first question, I'll start with you, John. A pleasure to have you here with us. Very much appreciate you taking the time. And I really see you as a trailblazer in this industry. As a leader of transit agencies, you were one of the first in our industry to actually reach out to the Ubers and Lyfts of the world to build these types of partnerships. And every leadership role you've taken in a new city, in a new transit agency, you bring that same mentality of filling transit deserts, helping expand the reach of public transit networks, helping them become more resilient. Tell us how it works and what has surprised you most in these partnerships now that you've been at it for more than half a decade.
Well, quite frankly, I'll start with my first experience working with Uber was when I was at the Comet in Columbia, South Carolina. And in Columbia, there was an issue of food deserts. There was a lot of grocery stores that were closing and moving to the suburban areas of our service area. So people who were living in the urban core struggled in getting fresh fruit and produce. So I went to Uber, went to Lyft to see what could we do to create some type of a program that would help get people to the grocery store when they can't necessarily do it on the bus, especially if you're a single parent and you have to go to work, daycare, and run other errands. And that's where Comet to the Market was born. And both Uber and Lyft were active in that program where the Comet would subsidize the first $5 of the trip. We geofenced every grocery store in Lexington and Richland counties. And basically the way to use it was you just got either a voucher or a code off the bus and planned your trip from the bus to whatever grocery store and then do the same in reverse. And that program just took off. Then we further expanded because we were running buses until midnight carrying 1 passenger per hour, which never made sense. So then we started Comet at night. Same intent, $5 subsidy, and we would provide services basically between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. the following morning. And it was just a way to get people home from work, home from bars, just another transportation opportunity. And we were able to use the savings from discontinuing unproductive late night bus service to pay for those subsidies. So quite frankly, having these type of programs with TNCs has been a great approach in basically being able to bring mobility options to the areas that I've served. And we also been able to address the Title VI issues and the ADA issues by either using our demand response program to provide those wheelchair accessible trips. We worked with Uber and Lyft to basically sell their gift cards or allow low-income unbanked folks to purchase gift cards where they would use those Visa and MasterCard gift cards to pay for the Lyft and Uber fare. Or they can call us and we would book that trip for them.
That's amazing, John. It's amazing to think about how far the industry has come since those early days with you and Brad Miller at PSTA really kind of leading the charge. And both places still continue those programs to this day. In fact, PSTA now has 6 unique programs leveraging TNC and taxi supply to complement their network. Very awesome, very awesome. My second question is for you, Madeline, and thank you again for joining us today for this awesome discussion. We all know that the bus and train networks are really the backbone of mobility in our cities, but not everybody has equal access to that backbone of mobility. Therefore, they don't have equitable access to economic and social opportunities. And I know your team, in collaboration with LA Metro, are working on a universal mobility wallet project here in Los Angeles. Would love to hear from you what you guys have learned in your pilot process.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar, Los Angeles Metro, in partnership with LADOT, is piloting, it's actually on the second phase of a pretty novel pilot program that's effectively guaranteed income for transportation. So the Mobility Wallet program provides a prepaid debit card where recipients get $150 a month that they can use on shared transportation services, effectively anything besides cost for their private cars. The first phase is centered in South Los Angeles. The second phase is another cohort in South Los Angeles and actually a larger cohort in LA County. All of this is income limited, so a roughly $55,000 annual income per household. And the idea behind universal basic mobility is that you should just be able to get to what you need to get to. And especially in South Los Angeles, there is a good backbone of transit for the most part. It varies, right, across the different service area. And for the majority of low-income people, we know that car ownership or kind of car access in their household is relatively low. And so they got to use everything else, right? But for low-income people, like TNCs are just not really an option because of the cost. Like it is very much reserved for emergencies only. And therefore, when public transit fails them, where it doesn't show up, or you have some very realistic thing where you wake up too late, the economic consequences of that are very dire. So what we're finding with the mobility wallet is that this effectively makes, people are saying, now I have transportation covered, or now I have options. It's not that actually the service environment changed, but they have the financial ability to actually pay for what they need. Each household kind of managed it differently. We're doing qualitative research. We did qualitative research in the first phase, so we really got to understand how people thought about this. And I'd say the most common of that $150 is they'd put $75 on the tap card and reserve $75 for ride hail. And then they kind of think about, what trips do I need to make? I want to reserve that too. And what we're finding is that I think that TNCs are actually more complementary to public transit than we're really thinking about. The main competitor to public transit is car ownership. It is not car access. And I think if we give people the ability to actually have ride hailing as an option, as part of their ecosystem, we can actually keep them on transit better. I understand it's not an easy message, I think, for transit operators to hear, because we think about this as really competitive. But, we think about it kind of from the user side, right? We want to make sure people have good options. And sometimes public transit isn't that in all cases. And so we can think about how we're using a tool like Mobility Wallet to give people choice also, that they get to decide how they need to get around. And we can kind of use this in this next phase. We're going to really be digging into this relationship between transit and ride hailing in a way to kind of understand more of this kind of trade-offs, competition, substitute kind of part of the equation.
Comment to that?
Please.
I definitely agree with you, Madeline. And quite frankly, public transit agencies need to become mobility agencies. It's not about the bus and paratransit. There's so much more they can do to move people. In our case, we're into the bike share business, for instance. We do van pools. We're now getting ready to have a partnership with Bird, and we'll subsidize scooter trips, all to just help people get from point A to point B.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, just to add a thought to that, and I like how you said it, Madeline, it's not about competition. It's about working together under the right 3P framework to deliver on mobility solutions in our communities that both public transit agencies serve and TNCs. And I think we're seeing that migration slowly happening in the industry. We don't see each other as competitors, but we see each other as partners. And it's about meeting riders where they are. The right form factor vehicle at the right time, right place, allows us to stretch those finite government dollars that pay for all this mobility in our communities. Thank you for that, Madeline. Thank you, John. Joshua, my next question is for you, and thank you again for joining us on stage here. As principal at InfraStrategies, you guide public and private sector infrastructure and technology developers globally. Governments can struggle at the juxtaposition of design-build projects versus 3P projects, which can allow government to leverage infrastructure and technology of private partners for the public good. To make this more practical, through the lens of microtransit specifically, talk to us about the pros and cons of leaning on companies like Uber and Lyft to deliver on microtransit service versus a design-build implementation of a transit agency microtransit service. And to make the question even more interesting, is there a world where both models can work together?
Yeah, and I think what you're getting at is more of a political question than it is a transportation question, right? Because when I was at LA Metro, we did several different partnerships with TNCs, and they varied based on what we could do under those circumstances. The first one we did was with Uber when we partnered on the opening of the Expo line to Santa Monica, and we did a little promotion with you guys. And I think the reaction within Metro, by the way, was exactly what we were just hearing. Like, wow, why would we partner with a competitor? And we were kind of trying to change the mindset of, well, this is a competitor who can actually help us get more people to and from our station. So the real benefit. And that was kind of the groundbreaking in 2016 of that idea. But then we also had a partnership with VIA, which is another TNC, where they were providing first last mile services to a number of different stations in different service areas in Los Angeles. And that was done much similar to the Uber model, like just a turnkey operation, like you guys do this and we'll help, we'll have a partnership where we pay for some of it, but it's really a partnership where you're operating and we're operating together. That's very different than Metro Micro, which is a microtransit service operated by LA Metro. And we created it that way. This goes back to the original point, largely because we didn't see any other way politically to do it. Whether it was the best or not wasn't a question we could potentially ask. If we wanted to have long-term, on-demand transit service in Los Angeles, it had to be done in partnership with our labor unions. The full stop, right? That was it. And so we spent a year negotiating with SMART, the union, to come up with a deal and even before that, we had to bring them along with the idea of doing this and that they would be the operators. And if we had tried to go about it any other way, we would have gotten blown up. In fact, the mobility on demand service that we were providing with VIA at around the same time made them so suspicious that our real plot was to never use Metro drivers again and to just outsource everything, that they were getting very, very nervous about it. And so you have to consider the political environment. I do a lot of work right now with transit agencies in the South. It's a very different story, right? There you're much more likely to be able to have partnerships where the labor unions aren't necessarily a part of that discussion, for better or for worse. And one interesting thing, just because when Madeline was talking about universal basic mobility and that concept here, it got me thinking about how in the South, you can't actually say those words, right? So when we work with transit agencies in the South, we don't talk about universal basic mobility. We don't talk about subsidizing low-income people. It's a very different language that you use. But we actually came up with a euphemism called subscription-based services, which is a great way of talking about how we can provide mobility, like John was saying, on a wider basis as a transit agency. And I think that shift that John, you were talking about, is happening. I've seen it happening at lots of different agencies. People have that idea, but getting to it and actually implementing it, it depends strongly on your political environment, on the leadership of the transit agency, on the willingness to push the boundaries of what transit has been in the past, because there's still that resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you captured it well, the political nature of this. And it's not just the United States. The same discussions are being had in Australia and Europe and Asia for these types of services. And politics is typically what gets in the way. And I'd love to actually share an example of why this works and how it's a no-brainer when the politics get out of the way. For example, if you look at a city like Dallas, Texas, in the South, where the politics are more conducive to these types of partnerships. Dallas has gone through a massive transformation as a transit agency over the last 5 years. They have a 700 square mile service area. Like, that's crazy, right? And the density level is nowhere near LA. So how do you serve a population that's that dispersed? Well, they invested massively into microtransit, and they do it through both approaches. They have a baseline level of service in 32 unique zones that used to have fixed routes that had that one person riding per hour late at night. And now they've replaced 30% of their fixed route infrastructure with on-demand microtransit zones. And the cool part is that it's a fully accessible service because every zone has at least one DART vehicle that's fully accessible operating. And then in every single zone, anytime the ETA for that bus gets to 10 minutes or more, people, when they're ordering a mini bus or microbus ride, automatically get an Uber instead through DART's technology. And that's incredible for people who live in neighborhoods where the bus came once an hour, very few people were riding it. It was costing the agency $32 a trip in those areas. They moved to a microtransit system, and now an individual is guaranteed a ride in 10 minutes for the price of public transit, and it costs the agency half to operate that service. They're at about $16 a trip versus the $32 a trip on those empty fixed route buses where they weren't effective. And they just moved all those buses to the labor unions point, and the conversation we have with the labor unions, it's not about replacing jobs, it's about incremental jobs. What we're trying to do is complement what you guys do already well, and maybe even make it better by taking some of those buses and creating higher frequency routes, because frequency is king in transit, right? That's how you drive ridership. If a bus or a train shows up every 5 minutes, passengers will show up too. So that allowed Dallas to actually make their core service stronger. And it's a long journey, right? I think they started in 2016, 2017 with their experiments, and really only in 2023 did they get to that fully integrated experience that I talked about.
I guess I want to follow up with a question either for you or for John kind of in this, which is just, the bus is a very understandable thing, right? A vehicle shows up, you walk on, you pay your fare. You may need to understand how much it costs or what the fare medium is, right? But it's understandable. The one question I have about this is when agencies are launching new services, what's the kind of customer communication about, especially people that have a very easy understanding of the existing? And then how do you talk to customers about, getting into this new thing and something that's, like a technology-based approach that they may not be as familiar with?
Particularly in Columbia, South Carolina, we actually went to the customer. We held travel training fairs at the Comet Central, which is the downtown transit center. We put materials on the buses. We had opportunities where people can come to us and we'll show them how to use the app. If they didn't feel comfortable with technology, we'll basically allow them to call us and we'll do the work for them. We also was very active working with the South Carolina Lifeline. And we had them come to various locations throughout the service area to sign people up for free smartphones so that they can get the data to be able to use the Uber program or the Lyft program, or as well as our bike share program, and even plan their trip on the Comet system. So it's a lot of outreach, there's a lot of hand-holding, but once people learn it and they understand it, they're excited to use it.
Yeah, great question, Madeline. Just to add on to what John said, it's been the case in every community that rolls out these programs. The technology is really important, but so is the tactical effort to engage the community, to educate them on changes. I mean, Dallas literally set up pop-up tables in front of grocery stores in neighborhoods that were losing their fixed route, and they had a tablet with their GoPass app, which is their mobility as a service app that allows you to access microtransit, bus, train, all the modes, including fare capping, which is incredible, right? And they demoed to people, hey, you're no longer going to have to feed the dollar into the fare box, right? You're going to download this app, and this is how you're going to pay for our transit services. By the way, now we're going to have a vehicle come pick you up at your house instead of you having to figure out how to bridge that 5-mile gap to the train or bus station. So the very important part of scaling these programs is the tactical effort.
And we're actually going through that in Reading as we speak. In 2 weeks, we're going to be eliminating 3 significantly underperforming fixed routes and shifting them to microtransit. And then also the launching a subsidy program with Uber. And as part of that, we've been actually out training people. Don't worry, just because your bus is going away, you now can have more frequent service, and you could do it at the touch of a button on your phone.
And is it the same price?
It is the same price. We did not want to make it a premium service because at the end of the day, they had something that was reliable and that they could depend on. And we felt if we made it a premium service, we'd actually lose ridership and get complaints. So all of our microtrans is the exact same price as the bus. You can buy a bus pass that you can use for a 24-hour period, and you could use it on all modes of our system. We went away. We were originally going to do the 1 day, but we felt that it's not fair if somebody bought a day pass at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and if the transit system ends at 7, that they only got a value of 3 hours. So by making it 24-hour, they get that full value.
Awesome. So this next question is for the whole panel, and Joshua already kind of hit at this question a little bit earlier with the politics comments and how that can get in the way of really good things that work. So when it comes to offering innovative programs or services, the regulatory and funding environment can be confusing for transit agencies. For example, agencies ask questions like, can I use FTA funds to pay for my complimentary first last mile program at the end of a train line? Can I report that data to the NTD? Does that count as ridership? Can my paratransit riders get same-day service on Uber that I use FTA funds for? These are all questions that operators of service don't think about very often because their job is to put service on the street, get the buses to pull out on time at 4 a.m, right? Get the trains to pull out on time. So they don't know how to approach something this new often. So my question to all of you is, what's your advice to transit agencies? And John, you've lived it when they're not sure where to start on the regs and policy side.
I think first and foremost, I want to say, Dmitriy, you've been very instrumental in changing the tone at Uber in relation to that regulatory requirements for transit agencies, because we have those strict requirements of NTD and ADA and Title VI, and you being able to help navigate that, especially with your general counsel, to allow transit agencies to use federal funds for Uber programs has been phenomenal. But definitely doing research, talking to other transit agencies that have had the experience. Both Uber and Lyft do have transit teams where they're very well versed in the FTA requirements, and that they basically can give you the support necessary to help a public transit agency launch a program. And now there's just so many examples of transit agencies across the country launching TNC programs as complementary to their transit system.
Yeah, one of the things that our firm does is we work with transit agencies to find funding sources that work for them, which means in many cases, increasingly, funding sources that are more flexible than the typical capital money that's available especially through the federal government. And I think what you're speaking to is, not surprisingly, the industry has been slow to change, right? And whereas there was a feeling or at least an impetus 40, 50 years ago that the problem was we needed to build more stuff. Now that is shifting and people are realizing, well, maybe we still need to build some stuff, but we also need to fund operations. And operations does not just mean buses and trains, that there are other ways to achieve those same goals that are perhaps more efficient, provide a better customer experience that should be available to people. So as the industry shifts, and this is I think something that is challenging to make change at the federal level on this policy. But I think certainly at the state and local level, those changes are occurring. You're seeing more flexible funding pots. I think there will be more opportunities to fund more innovative services with that money.
Yeah, and the Mobility Wallet in Los Angeles is funded by the California Air Resources Board. There are a bunch of these Mobility Wallet pilots throughout the country. Portland is actually the only city that has now a permanent program. The good thing, compared to guaranteed income, which is pretty much entirely coming from the philanthropic sector, there's at least government funds that are going towards this, so we are going to start to see this. But the one of the places that we're seeing that people are using their mobility wallet on, we saw it when I did research on Blue LA, the public car sharing program, is that people are using more reliable and shorter and quicker services to get to the doctor. Right? Like these are very important, time-sensitive appointments. And there's actually, the United States spends literally $1 billion on transportation through the Health and Human Services Department because there's actually a mandate within Medicaid to provide transportation to people that don't have it. And so I think that in addition to doing a better job at flexing the federal transportation funds, I think transit agencies should start to look to the healthcare sector and like the state insurers, health insurers as partners, because we know that transportation interventions are cost saving to healthcare. Having people show up at their appointments and show up on time is actually a cost saving measure. So I really kind of think that transit agencies should at least start those conversations because there's a lot of money out there that's being invested in this sector.
That makes a lot of sense. And, Madeline, something in particular you said really struck a chord with me. And it's in regards to the non-emergency medical transportation sector, which is a complete silo to paratransit, which is, to me, one of the biggest crimes in North America. I mean, honestly, for people with disabilities especially, because, you could have so many more economies of scale, so many more efficiencies, especially for those very hard to find and come by wheelchair accessible vehicles, right? Especially with the supply chain issues today, it's harder and harder to get those vehicles. So I love the idea of more flexible funding sources, looking locally, but also the idea of maybe we need to look at some industries that have a lot in common and bring them together. And that's going to obviously take massive policy, regulatory change, and funding sources changes. But I think that's a massive opportunity for us here.
And we're seeing very much that the healthcare sector is partnering with Uber and Lyft. Like it's, I imagine, it's a growth part of the Uber business because it makes sense. It's something that people know, and it effectively helps. It helps people. It helps the industry. So I just think that, to Joshua's point, that the transit agencies are big bureaucratic creatures, or big ships that are slow to turn. There's a lot of exciting things happening in other sectors and thinking about transportation that we can borrow some of that thinking and change.
And even during the pandemic, Uber was very instrumental in giving funds to transit agencies to help subsidize people to get to COVID tests. Particularly when I was the administrator for the county of Hawaii, Uber was able to give us a pot of funds that we were able to help promote people to get to COVID testing, which really started to introduce the Helion ridership to TNCs, which was not performing well on Hawaii Island.
And the point of this is that if you can have car access for those trips, like then you maybe don't either you stabilize your car ownership or you don't feel you're forced into that because you can get it for the things you need. I think if you talk to people that like don't drive a lot, there might be one particular trip type why they're holding on to this car, right? And so if we think about making sure that people have other options for that one particular trip, you know, if someone that is on dialysis, they have a lot of those trips, right? Like they have a lot of these very frequent things. Can we give them an option for that so that maybe there are other things that are a little less time sensitive or where transit works really well, where it does work for a lot of people for commutes, but they think about it. This is, I think, the kind of idea, to John's point, the kind of mobility partners and kind of mobility service, but you have to break your brain a little bit to accept that there is a complementary relationship to be had.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for sharing your perspective on the subject, your experience with it. Very much appreciate it. Let's focus or shift our discussion for the last question or the last topic and make it a little bit more forward-looking. So let's do kind of a fun visioning exercise. Give me a 2030 New York Times front page headline that represents a bold prediction for the future of public transit and public mobility networks, and briefly explain what's behind the headline. And of course, I'm happy to start. I'll be the guinea pig here. So let's all imagine this headline: New York Times, 2030, the last private car in Manhattan. Forget congestion pricing. The New York MTA announces the final day of private car operation on the island of Manhattan, starting in 2031. Mobility will now be strictly provided through MTA subway, bus operations, and their partnerships with TNCs, taxis, and micromobility players. Access to all modes of mobility will be provided through MTA's Mass app or any number of private marketplaces like Apple, Google, Uber, Transit app, and many others. That's the dream future, I think, for us here in North America, is getting out of our privately owned cars, single occupancy trips. And to me, that headline's all about cooperation, because transit alone isn't going to take us there. Uber and Lyft alone aren't going to take us there. It's going to take that collaboration to get to that type of a headline 7 years from now. But I'll pick on you next, Joshua.
Well, so I understand why that would be a compelling vision for Manhattan. I don't think that's a particularly likely vision for Los Angeles, and I'm kind of thinking about Los Angeles and how that could work. And I think where we are going and where I could see things really happening is there are more and more lanes of traffic that are being dedicated to people who are not in private cars, right? And those lanes are typically now being used for buses primarily, but as the technology improves, I could definitely see those lanes being used for other things besides buses, where people are contributing and are net benefit from a transportation or environmental perspective by using those lanes, which could include people who are using TNCs who do not own cars, for example, or people who are using TNCs and there's multiple people in the car. So you could envision a network of more and more lanes in Los Angeles being dedicated to non-single occupancy vehicle use. And under those circumstances, you're going to have way better traffic flow for millions of people. And that's, I think, where we're headed. And I think we all need to kind of keep that vision in mind, especially for the games, but not just limited to the games.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Not every city is built the same way, not the same density profiles. So that makes a ton of sense. John, I'll pick on you next.
Are we like just looking at New York, or can it be anything?
It could be anything. New York Times headline.
Okay.
But it can be about anything.
I would say USDOT renames FTA the FMA, the Federal Mobility Administration. And they, as part of the FMA, they are now incentivizing transit agencies to use their dollars to spend on shared mobility opportunities to reduce congestion. Particularly, bicycles are now treated as public transportation. Being able to use dollars easily on transportation network companies, autonomous vehicles, anything that can basically reduce the single occupancy use of a vehicle.
I love that. FMA is burned into my brain now.
Remember they used to be called UMTA. So they can change their name again.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, John. Madeline, we'll end with you.
I guess I'll think about an LA Times headline. Something to the effect of, grandmother attends every kid's birthday party for their life. Because frankly, the type of trips that people aren't making that we're seeing through Mobility Wallet are the trips that aren't the essential things in life. They're getting to their jobs, they're getting to the grocery store. It's not great, but they're doing it. But what they're missing out on these trips that really make a difference. Literally, one of the most heartbreaking things that we heard in the post-pilot interview was someone said, I just don't see my mom as much now. And that really broke our heart because that's what the power of transportation is. It gives you a good quality of life and it makes trips that may seem hard. It's like, oh, I can do that. So that's why kind of the vision of a transportation ecosystem and one where we have a transportation safety net is one that people get to live quality lives where they don't make trade-offs about the things that they know actually make a difference because they just can't get there.
That's an awesome place to end. You brought us back to the beginning, essentially, right? Together we're better. Together we can make mobility networks more inclusive through these innovative programs and partnerships. So thank you guys for your time today. Thank you for being a part of this panel, and thank you everyone for joining us. We do have 4 minutes for questions. If anybody has a question, I'm happy to take some. Go ahead.
Understanding how effective using TNCs is in rural areas, medical situations, in an urban environment where it's a very different setting, do we look at the issue of sustainability and whether reliance on TNCs is actually not the sustainable option because they are circulating, because it might have been much more effective to do transit, public transit, or some other shared form of ridership? What are we doing about the sustainability aspect and reducing vehicle miles traveled?
I mean, all those arguments you make are the exact arguments about the problems with cars. They're not necessarily the problems with TNCs. And the problem is that we don't manage our cars and our roadway. And so now the new thing has to address all of the things that we haven't done over 30 years. So not to say that your question is invalid, but I do want to kind of put it in this ecosystem that we need to manage our system better.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, right? It's like if you don't have congestion pricing, then you're going to have a problem of overabundance of driving, and that's going to include TNCs. It's not limited to TNCs. But just real quick, we did some work with the Hollywood Bowl recently where we were working with Uber and Lyft to change how TNC access was happening at the Hollywood Bowl. And that improvement did have a net sustainability benefit because what happened was first of all, we reduced overall traffic, but the changes we made also led to more bus use for people going to and from the bowl. So that's why it is all part of the same system. Like you have to kind of think of it cohesively because there can be net benefits when you think about it holistically. And if you just isolate each one and say, well, that's bad and that's good, you're going to be less productive.
And as a Hollywood resident, I really am thankful for these improvements.
I just want to throw into the rural aspect. With my role in Escalon, a town of 7,000 residents that's about 15 miles east of Manteca or 15 miles north of Modesto, bringing Uber there was really a savior to our residents because we had a situation where we had to suspend the transit system for about 3 months. And because of that, we started a subsidy program and it took it off. And people have found it to actually be more effective to utilize than the transit system. And it actually brought down our subsidy per passenger. And we also started to see more people sign up to become Uber drivers because they realize that the city is actually going to be paid a subsidy to encourage people to use the program. So we saw actually rewarding results from bringing Uber to a rural area. So I think it can occur if it's launched properly.
And there's probably time for one more question.
You can see absolutely nothing from this.
Sorry,
stage, so thank you.
it was already answered a little bit, but I guess 2 parts is the examples that you'd brought up in South Carolina and in Texas. I just have a question about how effective they were in ridership numbers, did ridership decrease due to friction? Did it stabilize, right? Was the one person riding the bus at night the same one person riding in an Uber at night? Or, did it increase in any substantial way? And then the second part is cost was mentioned as part of why the mobility wallet is helpful, right? Using TNCs can often be cost prohibitive. And there was a mention about the $5 subsidy, the floor. But, with TNCs, the pricing can be variable. Would you happen to know what the average net payment was by customers, and how did that vary, right? If I'm planning to go to the grocery store, how much do I need to budget in addition to the $5? Can it vary between $1 more or 10, 15? What is that range?
On the South Carolina approach, I could tell you that we had about 15 buses running at night between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. And all of them were about 1 passenger per hour, and we were spending close to $1.2 million to run that. When we reduced all those routes to about 9 p.m., except a few, and launched Comet at night, we actually ended up spending about $350,000, and we actually saw an increase in ridership on the nighttime performance. And the sole reason why that occurred was we created flexibility. Instead of someone having to walk to a bus stop at night or walk home from a bus stop waiting for a bus to come by hourly, they can now, like they worked at Walmart, got off at midnight, they can just get a car and go straight to their house in a safe manner.
Just to pick up on one thing you said about ridership. Ridership is not necessarily the metric you want to use to evaluate success in these cases. I mean, as Madeline was pointing out, your goal is in many ways changing people's lives for the better and improving accessibility, especially for those who need it most. I mean, assuming that's your goal, ridership may not capture that. So I think there's a tendency in our industry to focus on cost and ridership as being the two things that matter. There's a whole lot of other stuff that matters. And if you don't think about what those things are, then you're not going to be as successful in pursuing these partnerships.
Awesome. I think that takes us to the end. We're at time. Thank you again, guys. Appreciate it.